the sound that allowed knowledge to travel. For most of human history, knowledge moved no farther than a voice could carry, disappearing the moment sound faded into the air. Ideas, warnings, discoveries, and instructions existed only as long as someone was speaking them, and once silence returned, those ideas had to be reconstructed from memory or lost entirely. To understand why sound changed everything, we must return to a world where distance silenced ideas, and learning depended entirely on presence. Early humans could see, touch, and gesture, but complex coordination required something more flexible, something that could travel without sight. Gestures demanded visibility. Touch demanded proximity. Neither could cross the distance between two people separated by terrain or darkness. Voices became that bridge. Sound moved through obstacles that blocked every other form of communication. It carried around corners and across open ground. It reached people who could not be seen and delivered meaning without requiring eye contact or physical closeness. At first, sound was instinctive. Cries warned of danger. Calls gathered groups. Simple tones carried urgency, fear, or safety. Meaning lived inside emotion, not structure. A sharp cry did not need to be understood intellectually. It triggered a response built into the body itself. But slowly, humans began shaping sound deliberately. Pitch varied. Rhythm formed. Repetition created patterns. Sound stopped being reactions and started becoming signals. This transition was gradual but decisive. Where once a cry simply expressed alarm, a shaped sound could specify the nature of the threat or the response required. This was not language yet. It was alignment. A specific sound meant come closer. Another meant danger. Another meant stay. Each signal narrowed the gap between individual awareness and group coordination, allowing multiple people to act on the same understanding without needing to see the same thing at the same time. Sound allowed humans to coordinate without seeing one another. Hunters moved together through forests. Groups responded instantly to threats. Actions synchronized across space. The advantage was enormous. A group that could coordinate through sound could cover more ground and execute more complex strategies than any group limited to visual signals alone. Then sound crossed another threshold. It began carrying ideas. Stories formed through rhythm and repetition. Instructions survived longer. Knowledge could be shared with those who were not present when it was learned. This was fundamentally different from signaling. A signal prompted immediate action. An idea persisted beyond the moment, shaping future decisions long after the original sound had faded. Sound became memory that moved. And once knowledge could travel through air, humanity was no longer limited by silence. As sound became structured, it began reshaping how humans thought and learned, because spoken information could move faster than any other human tool. Language emerged from patterns of sound that carried shared meaning. Words replaced gestures. Sentences replaced signals. Ideas could now be combined, refined, and passed forward with precision. The ability to string sounds into sequences that represented complex thoughts was a breakthrough, because it allowed humans to describe not just what was happening, but what had happened, what might happen, and what should happen. This changed teaching. Skills no longer required constant demonstration. Instructions could be spoken once and remembered. Knowledge spread within groups instead of staying locked inside individuals. A technique discovered by one person could be explained to others without requiring them to witness the original act. Learning accelerated because it was no longer bottlenecked by direct physical observation. Sound also strengthened social bonds. Stories created shared identity. Myths explained the world. Names personalized relationships. Voices carried emotion in ways symbols never could. The tone of a voice, the rhythm of a phrase, the pause before a word, all carried meaning beyond the literal content. Sound connected people not just informationally, but emotionally, weaving threads of trust and belonging. But sound had limits. Spoken knowledge depended on memory. It changed with retelling. Meaning drifted. What was heard depended on who listened and how they interpreted it. Each person who received a piece of spoken knowledge filtered it through their own experience and capacity for recall. Still, humans preferred sound because it was immediate and alive. Conversations allowed correction. Questions could be answered. Understanding could adapt in real time. Unlike a static gesture or a fixed symbol, Spoken language could respond to confusion and clarify itself in the moment of delivery. As societies grew, spoken knowledge became essential for coordination. Leaders addressed crowds. Agreements were declared publicly. Culture lived inside collective listening. The ability to speak to many people at once gave spoken language a role in governance, ritual, and social cohesion that no other form of communication could match. Yet, this reliance created vulnerability. When voices were silenced, knowledge disappeared. When speakers died, stories vanished. Sound was powerful but fragile. The entire intellectual heritage of a community could be lost in a single generation if the people who carried it could not pass it on. This tension pushed humans toward preserving sound's meaning beyond the moment, because knowledge that could travel still needed to last. And the next discovery would try to solve that problem. As spoken knowledge spread, its fragility became impossible to ignore, because what traveled through sound alone could disappear just as easily. Memories failed. Stories shifted. Details blurred. Each retelling changed meaning slightly, shaped by emotion, bias, or forgetting. Knowledge survived, but not accurately. What began as a precise instruction or careful observation could, after several retellings, become something quite different. This created a strange imbalance. Sound allowed ideas to move freely, but it also allowed them to drift. Truth depended on who spoke loudest, not who remembered best. Volume, confidence, and charisma could elevate a distorted version of an idea above a more accurate one. Power followed voice. Charisma mattered. Persuasion outweighed accuracy. Leaders who spoke well influenced belief, even when their words were wrong. Sound became a tool not just of sharing, but of control. The ability to shape what others believed through spoken delivery gave certain individuals disproportionate influence over collective understanding. At the same time, sound deepened humanity's inner world. Language allowed abstract thought. Humans could describe things that were not present. They could imagine futures, explain causes, and debate meaning. This capacity for abstraction was transformative. It meant that humans were no longer confined to the immediate, concrete world in front of them. They could reason about possibilities and plan for circumstances that had not yet arrived. Conversation created reflection. Listening created empathy. Spoken stories built emotional continuity between generations, even when facts shifted. The act of hearing someone else's experience, told in their own voice and feeling, created a bridge between lives that would otherwise remain separate. How recording memory changed civilization. For most of human history, memory lived only inside fragile minds, fading with time, emotion, and death, taking entire worlds of experience with it. Every person who died carried away not just their own story, but the accumulated observations, skills, and insights that had filled their lifetime, leaving behind only what others had managed to absorb through direct contact. To understand why recording memory changed everything, we must return to a time when knowledge survived only as long as someone could remember it and pass it on accurately. Early humans relied on stories, repetition, and ritual to preserve what mattered, knowing that forgetting could mean danger, loss, or extinction. The stakes were not abstract. A forgotten technique for identifying poisonous plants, a lost understanding of seasonal animal behavior, a misremembered route to water. Any of these lapses could have direct and severe consequences for an entire community. Experience accumulated slowly. Skills were relearned. Mistakes repeated. Progress reset with every generation, because memory could not outlast the people who carried it. Each generation began not from the peak of the previous one's understanding, but from whatever partial, imperfect version of that understanding had survived the transfer. The loss was invisible, because no one could measure what had been forgotten. But humans began searching for ways to make memory permanent. Marks scratched into surfaces. Symbols arranged with intention. Objects used to store meaning beyond the mind. These early attempts were crude, limited, and often ambiguous, but they represented a fundamentally new approach to the problem of knowledge loss, one that shifted the burden of preservation from biological memory to the physical world. This was more than communication. It was preservation. A recorded memory did not forget. It did not change with emotion. It waited. It allowed knowledge to move forward intact. Instead of starting over, the reliability of a mark, its stubborn persistence through time and weather and human forgetfulness, gave it a power that no spoken word could match. For the first time, humans could build on the past instead of repeating it. This single capability, the ability to accumulate knowledge across generations without degradation, was perhaps the most significant development in the entire history of human civilization, because it transformed progress from a fragile, easily reversed process into a durable, compounding one. Memory stopped being personal. It became collective. And in that shift, civilization found a way to remember itself. As memory moved outside the mind, it began reshaping how humans learned, planned, and governed, because once information could be stored, it could be accumulated without limit. Recorded memory allowed knowledge to stack. One discovery no longer erased another. Skills improved across generations. Ideas evolved instead of restarting. The cumulative nature of recorded knowledge meant that each generation could begin where the previous one had ended, building upward rather than rebuilding from the foundation. This compounding effect accelerated every domain of human activity, from tool-making to agriculture to the organization of social life. This accumulation changed education. Learning shifted from imitation to study. People could access experiences they had never lived. Understanding expanded beyond individual lifespan. A person born into a community with extensive records had access to the concentrated wisdom of dozens or hundreds of lifetimes. Memory records also stabilized society. Laws were written, agreements preserved, history ordered. Continuity replaced reliance on fragile recollection. The ability to reference a fixed, unchanging record when disputes arose gave communities a stability that purely oral traditions could never provide. But this permanence introduced rigidity. Recorded ideas resisted change. Mistakes endured alongside wisdom. Outdated beliefs remained influential simply because they were preserved. The same durability that made recorded memory so valuable also made it resistant to correction, because a written claim carried an authority that a spoken one did not, regardless of whether the claim was still accurate. Power concentrated around memory control. Those who decided what was recorded shaped reality. Archives became authority. Forgetting became political. The ability to determine which events and voices entered the permanent record was a form of power that influenced every future generation. Yet recorded memory also empowered questioning. Past decisions could be examined, patterns revealed, progress accelerated through reflection. The same records that could be used to consolidate power could also be used to challenge it, because they provided evidence that existed independently of the claims of any living authority. Human identity shifted. Individuals became part of a long narrative. Lives felt connected to something larger than the present moment. The awareness that one's actions might be recorded, remembered, and judged by future generations changed how people thought about their choices and their responsibilities. Memory was no longer just survival. It became legacy. And that legacy was already reshaping the future. As recorded memory expanded, it began reshaping power, culture, and identity, because once the past could be preserved, it could also be used, interpreted, and controlled. History stopped being a collection of stories and became a sequence of records. Events gained dates. Causes were debated. Responsibility could be traced. Memory began shaping judgment. The ability to look back at a documented sequence of events and draw conclusions about cause and effect gave humans a tool for understanding that was fundamentally different from anything oral tradition could provide, because it allowed comparison across time with precision that memory alone could never achieve. This changed authority. Leaders could justify actions by referencing the past. Traditions gained weight because they were written. Change slowed when records resisted reinterpretation. The written past became a kind of anchor, stabilizing institutions and practices even when circumstances had shifted enough to make those practices less effective or less appropriate. But recorded memory also challenged power. Inconsistencies became visible. Promises could be compared to outcomes. Lies could be exposed across time. A leader who made a public commitment that was recorded and preserved could be held accountable years or decades later, creating a form of oversight that had no equivalent in purely oral societies. Culture deepened. Art, philosophy, and science built upon preserved thought. Ideas traveled farther than their creators ever could. Civilization spoke to the future through archives, the accumulated intellectual output of society. preserved in written form, became a resource that transcended geography and time. The